Some moments arrive quietly, carrying the weight of years in a single breath. Others crash through your life like thunder, leaving everything changed in their wake. But the moment that altered everything for me came wrapped in flour, sugar, and the innocent hands of a 7-year-old who had no idea she was delivering a message that would cost her parents everything. How does a man stay calm when his own family laughs as he's told he isn't welcome anymore? Why did Christmas still happen after that, but without the money everyone depended on? This is how I stopped paying quietly and let the consequences speak instead. The dining room at Alara's house had that forced warmth that comes from expensive furniture and careful staging. Everything perfectly arranged, from the seasonal centerpiece to the matching napkins that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. I sat at the far end of the table, the same spot I'd occupied for 3 years of these pre-Christmas dinners, watching my daughter orchestrate what she called family time, but what felt more like a board meeting with better food. I'd paid for the dinner, of course. The catering bill had arrived in my email 2 days prior, $847 for what Alara called a simple family gathering. Nothing was simple when it came to my daughter's entertaining, but I'd transferred the money without comment, the same way I'd been transferring money for rent, utilities, business expenses, and every other cost that seemed to find its way to my bank account. "Grandpa Damon!" Mara's voice cut through the adult conversation like sunshine through storm clouds. My granddaughter appeared beside my chair, her small hands carefully balancing a plate of what looked like homemade fortune cookies. "I made these for everyone. Mom helped, but I did all the folding." The cookies were slightly lopsided, some golden brown, others a bit pale, each one clearly crafted by 7-year-old hands with more enthusiasm than precision. They were perfect in their imperfection, and I felt the first genuine smile of the evening cross my face. "You made these yourself?" I asked, accepting the cookie she placed in front of me. "All by myself. Well, Mom helped with the oven part, because I'm not allowed to touch the hot stuff yet, but I wrote all the fortunes and everything." Her pride was infectious, and for a moment, the artificial warmth of the room felt real. Around the table, the other adults were cracking open their cookies with appropriate sounds of delight. Rowan, my son-in-law, made an exaggerated show of reading his fortune aloud. "Your future is as bright as your smile." He grinned at Mara, who giggled and clapped her hands. Alara opened hers next. "Family is the greatest treasure." She smiled at her daughter, though I noticed the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the same polite expression she'd been giving me all evening, pleasant but distant, the look you might give a useful acquaintance rather than your father. I cracked open my cookie with the same casual expectation. The slip of paper inside was slightly larger than the others, written in Mara's careful 7-year-old printing with a purple crayon. I unfolded it, expecting something sweet about grandpas or Christmas or cookies. Instead, I read, "You're not welcome at Christmas." The words sat there on the paper, each letter clear and deliberate. Not the shaky, uncertain writing of a child making up fortunes, but something carefully copied from another source. I stared at the message for what felt like an hour, but was probably only seconds, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. The table had gone quiet. That particular silence that falls when everyone realizes something has gone wrong, but no one knows quite what yet. "What does yours say, Dad?" Alara's voice carried a note I couldn't quite identify. Nervousness? Guilt? Something else entirely? I looked up to find all eyes on me. Rowan was leaning forward slightly, his expression unreadable. Alara was studying her own fortune slip with sudden, intense interest. Only Mara looked genuinely curious, waiting to hear what surprise she'd given her grandfather. "You're not welcome at Christmas," I read aloud, keeping my voice level and calm. The silence that followed was different from the first one. This was the silence of people holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Mara's face crumpled in confusion. "That's not right," she said, looking between me and her mother. "That's not what I wrote. I wrote nice ones about Christmas and presents and—" "Oh, honey," Alara interrupted, her voice taking on that overly bright tone adults use when they're trying to smooth over something awkward. "Sometimes the fortunes get mixed up. It's just a silly mistake." But it wasn't a mistake, and we all knew it. I could see it in the way Rowan's mouth twitched, fighting back what wanted to be a smile. I could see it in the way Alara still wouldn't meet my eyes directly. This had been planned, orchestrated, delivered through the innocent hands of a child who had no idea she was being used as a messenger. Then Rowan started laughing. It began as a chuckle, the kind you might make at a mildly amusing joke, but it grew into something bigger. Soon he was laughing openly, slapping his hand on the table like he'd just heard the funniest thing in the world. "Oh, that's perfect," he said between laughs. "That's absolutely perfect. The old man gets told he's not welcome at Christmas through a fortune cookie. You can't write comedy like that." Alara joined in then, her laughter a bit more restrained but no less clear. "It is pretty funny when you think about it," she said. "I mean, the timing, the delivery method." Others around the table, Alara's friends who'd been invited to make the gathering feel more like a party and less like a family obligation, began laughing too. The kind of laughter that builds on itself, where everyone feels permission to find something funnier than it actually is because everyone else is laughing. I sat there listening to my family laugh at my exclusion from Christmas, watching my son-in-law slap the table in delight at the idea of me being unwelcome, seeing my daughter smile as she joined in the amusement at my expense. Only Mara wasn't laughing. She was looking around the table with the confused expression of a child who knows something is wrong but doesn't understand what. Her eyes kept coming back to me, searching my face for some explanation of why everyone was laughing at her grandfather. I waited for someone to stop, to say it had gone too far, to explain that of course I was welcome at Christmas, that this was all just a misunderstanding or a poorly executed joke. I waited for my daughter to remember that I was her father, or for my son-in-law to remember that I was the reason his business hadn't collapsed 6 months ago. But the laughter continued. If anything, it seemed to feed on itself, growing louder and more animated. Rowan was wiping tears from his eyes now, repeating, "A fortune cookie," like it was the punchline to the greatest joke ever told. I folded the slip of paper carefully, creasing it along the edges until it was small enough to fit in my wallet. Then I smiled, not the forced smile I'd been wearing all evening, but something genuine and calm. "Well," I said, standing up from the table, "I suppose that settles that, then?" The laughter faded as quickly as it had started. Suddenly everyone was looking at me again, but this time with uncertainty rather than amusement. "Dad, you know it's just—" Alara began. "Just what?" I asked, my voice still calm, still pleasant. "Just a joke, just a way to let me know how things really stand? Just a message delivered through my granddaughter because no one had the courage to say it directly?" I reached into my wallet and placed the folded fortune slip next to my plate. "Thank you for the clarity. It's always better to know where you stand." I kissed Mara on the top of her head, told her the cookies were delicious and that she was a wonderful baker, and walked out of that dining room with the sound of uncomfortable silence following me. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was something much more dangerous than either of those emotions. I was done. Driving home that night, I found myself thinking about how we'd arrived at this point. Not the fortune cookie moment. That was just the final confirmation of something that had been building for years. I was thinking about the slow, steady process by which I'd become nothing more than a wallet to my own family. It hadn't started that way. When Alara was young, before the divorce, before the remarriage, before Rowan and his endless series of financial emergencies, I'd been dad. Not perfect, not always present the way I should have been, but still recognizably a father rather than a financial institution. The change had been so gradual I'd barely noticed it happening. It started with legitimate needs, help with the down payment on their first house, assistance when Mara was born and Alara was on unpaid maternity leave, support during Rowan's transition between jobs, reasonable requests from family members facing temporary difficulties. But temporary had become permanent, and requests had become expectations. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, letting the memories play out in chronological order. The pattern was clearer when you looked at it all at once, like stepping back from a painting to see the whole image instead of just the brushstrokes. 2 years ago, when Rowan's first business venture failed, I'd covered their mortgage for 3 months while he got back on his feet. 6 months later, when his second attempt at entrepreneurship ran into cash flow problems, I'd provided what he called a bridge loan of $15,000. A loan that had never been repaid, never even been mentioned again after the check cleared. Last Christmas, I'd received a group text message with a shopping list rather than an invitation. "Dad, can you handle the gifts for Mara this year? We're thinking the bike she wanted, plus some clothes and books. Maybe $800,000 total? Thanks." No please. No, would you mind? Just an assumption that I would, of course, handle Christmas shopping for my own granddaughter while her parents took credit for the gifts. This year had been more of the same, but with less pretense. The family group chat had become a running list of expenses with my name attached. Damon, venue deposit $500. Damon, catering down payment $400. Damon, decorations and flowers $200. Not questions, not requests, just assignments. I'd paid them all, of course. Just like I'd paid for Rowan's business insurance, their family vacation last summer, Mara's private school tuition, and the seemingly endless stream of emergencies that required immediate financial intervention. When had I stopped being asked and started simply being told? When had thank you become about time? When had my presence at family gatherings become optional while my financial contribution remained mandatory? Inside my house, I made myself a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. My bank account told the story more clearly than my memories could. Automatic transfers to Alara's account for household expenses. Regular payments to Rowan's business for operational support. One-time transfers for unexpected costs that had become surprisingly expected. In the past year alone, I'd transferred over $40,000 to my daughter and son-in-law. Not loans, those implied eventual repayment. Not gifts, those implied gratitude. Just transfers. Money flowing from my account to theirs like water finding its level. My phone buzzed with a text message from the family group chat. Rowan had posted a photo of himself and Alara at some upscale bar, drinks in hand, big smiles for the camera. The message read, "Celebrating getting the Christmas planning done. Thanks to everyone who's contributing to make this year special. Everyone who's contributing." As if there were multiple people sharing the financial load instead of one person, me, covering everything while others took credit for the planning. I scrolled back through months of group chat messages, looking for patterns I'd been too polite to notice in real time. The messages fell into 3 categories. Social updates that didn't include me, planning discussions that assumed my payment, but not my presence, and direct financial requests disguised as family communications. "Dad, the venue needs the final payment by Friday. Can you handle that?" Not, "Would you be able to?" Not, "We hate to ask." Just, "Can you handle that?" Like I was a service provider rather than a family member. The most recent message from just 2 days ago was the most telling. "We'll send you the Christmas invoice soon. Probably around $3,000 total this year. Venue, food, gifts, decorations, the works. Worth it for family time, though." An invoice. For family time. That I apparently wasn't welcome to attend. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair, finally understanding what had happened. Somewhere along the way, my family had learned that I would pay for anything without complaint, contribute to any expense without question, and absorb any amount of financial responsibility without pushing back. They'd learned that my money came without conditions, without expectations, without consequences. More importantly, they'd learned that my money came more reliably than my presence. I might miss a dinner or skip a family outing, but the automatic transfers never missed a beat. The emergency funds were always available. The financial safety net never developed holes. I'd trained them, without realizing it, to see me as a resource rather than a person. And like any resource, I'd become valuable for what I provided rather than who I was. The fortune cookie message wasn't an insult. It was a logical conclusion. If someone's only value to you is their money, and you can get their money without their presence, then their presence becomes not just unnecessary but potentially inconvenient. Why have the old man sitting at the table, possibly asking awkward questions about where his money goes, when you can just cash his checks and celebrate without him? I understood now. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was angry or hurt. Those emotions had burned through me during the drive home and left something cleaner in their wake. I stayed awake because I was thinking, really thinking, for the first time in years, about what I wanted my life to look like. At 3 a.m., I was sitting in my home office with a legal pad, making lists. Not emotional lists full of grievances and hurt feelings, but practical lists about money, obligations, and choices. The kind of lists you make when you're solving a problem rather than just complaining about it. On the left side of the page, legal obligations. This was shorter than I'd expected. Child support had ended when Alara turned 18. The house they lived in was in their names, not mine. Rowan's business was his responsibility, not mine. Mara's education was her parents' obligation, not her grandfather's. Legally, I owed them nothing beyond what any citizen owes any other citizen. On the right side, voluntary contributions. This list was much longer. Monthly transfers for household support, business bailout funds, emergency loans that were never repaid, holiday expenses, vacation funding, private school tuition, car payments, insurance premiums, medical bills that their insurance should have covered but somehow didn't. The numbers were staggering when you added them up. More staggering was the realization that every single item on the right-hand list was optional. Not morally optional. I understood that family members help each other, but legally and practically optional. I could stop any or all of these payments at any time, and the only consequences would be social rather than legal. But it was the third list that really clarified things for me. I titled it, "What I Get in Return," and I stared at the blank page for a long time before I started writing. The list was embarrassingly short. Occasional text messages, usually related to money, invitations to events I was expected to fund but not necessarily welcome to attend. Updates about Mara's life, though those had become less frequent as she got older. Perfunctory holiday and birthday acknowledgments. That was it. 3 years of supporting 2 adults and partially raising a grandchild, and what I had to show for it was a handful of obligatory communications and the privilege of paying for celebrations I might or might not be invited to attend. I made one more list. What they get from me. This one filled 2 pages: financial security, business support, emergency funding, holiday expenses, educational costs, travel money, the freedom to make choices without worrying about consequences because Grandpa Damon would always be there with his checkbook open. 4 lists that told a very clear story. I was giving everything and receiving nothing, while they were giving nothing and receiving everything. It wasn't a relationship, it was a transaction. And like any transaction, it would continue as long as both parties found it beneficial. The fortune cookie message wasn't cruel, it was efficient. Why pretend I was family when I was really just a funding source? Why maintain the fiction of relationship when the reality was purely financial? I folded up the legal pad and put it in my desk drawer, then pulled out my laptop again. This time, I wasn't looking at my bank account to understand the past. I was looking at it to plan the future. My financial advisor had been telling me for years that I was being too generous with family members, that I needed to think about my own retirement, my own security. I'd always brushed off his concerns because family was supposed to come first, wasn't it? But what if they'd stopped being family and started being dependents? What if my generosity wasn't helping them but enabling them? Rowan's business was the perfect example. For 18 months, I'd been covering his shortfalls, his cash flow problems, his temporary difficulties. But businesses that require constant bailouts aren't businesses. They're expensive hobbies funded by someone else's money. By continuing to prop up his failing venture, I wasn't helping him succeed. I was preventing him from failing, which also prevented him from learning, growing, or finding something he was actually good at. The same logic applied to their household expenses. 2 adults with college degrees, living in a nice house, driving decent cars, sending their child to private school, all subsidized by me. What incentive did they have to budget, to make difficult choices, to live within their means? Why would they develop financial discipline when financial consequences never materialized? I'd been so focused on being a good father and grandfather that I'd failed to notice I was being a terrible teacher. I was teaching my daughter that responsibility was optional as long as someone else would handle the consequences. I was teaching my son-in-law that failure didn't matter because someone else would cover the costs. I was teaching my granddaughter that money appeared magically whenever it was needed, without effort or sacrifice or even gratitude. The switch that flipped wasn't anger, it was clarity. I could see the situation for what it really was instead of what I'd been pretending it was. And once you see clearly, you can't unsee, you can't go back to comfortable delusions once you've stared at uncomfortable truths. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. Not an angry letter or an emotional manifesto, but a simple, clear plan. If they wanted to treat me like a funding source rather than a family member, I could work with that. But funding sources have terms and conditions. They have requirements and expectations. They can be discontinued when they're no longer serving their intended purpose. The document I created wasn't about punishment, it was about boundaries. Clear, reasonable boundaries that any adult should be able to understand and respect. The kind of boundaries that healthy relationships require, but that I'd been too afraid to establish, because I thought it might push them away. But they'd already pushed me away, hadn't they? The fortune cookie was just the formal notification of something that had been true for months or maybe years. I wasn't welcome at Christmas, but my money was. I wasn't valued as a person, but I was essential as a resource. Fine. If that's how they wanted to play it, I could play too. But I was about to change the rules of the game in ways they couldn't possibly expect. Because the thing about being someone's financial safety net is that you hold all the power in the relationship, even when you're not using it. Even when you're pretending it doesn't exist. Even when you're letting other people make all the decisions about how your money gets spent, and when your presence is desired. But power unused isn't power lost. It's power saved. And I was about to start spending some of mine. The next morning, I called my accountant. Caleb North had been managing my finances for over a decade, and he'd never been shy about expressing his opinions regarding my family's financial arrangements. For years, I'd deflected his concerns with variations of their family, and it's complicated. But when I walked into his office that Wednesday morning, I could tell he knew something had changed. "Let me guess," he said before I'd even sat down. "You're finally ready to talk about those monthly transfers." Caleb was one of those accountants who understood that money was never just about money. It was about relationships, power, control, and consequences. He'd been watching my accounts for years, seeing the patterns I'd been too close to notice, and he'd been waiting for this conversation. I need to understand exactly what I'm paying for, I said, pulling out the folder I'd created the night before. All of it. Every automatic transfer, every recurring payment, every commitment I've made. I want to know what's legally required and what's voluntary. He already had the reports ready, as if he'd been preparing for this moment. I've been tracking your family-related expenses for the past 3 years, he said, sliding a thick folder across his desk. The numbers are significant. Significant was an understatement. In the past 36 months, I'd transferred just over $127,000 to my daughter and son-in-law, not including gifts, not including emergency loans that had never been repaid, not including expenses I'd paid directly to vendors rather than reimbursing them. The business support alone is $68,000, Caleb said, pointing to a line item on the summary sheet. And that's not structured as a loan or investment. It's just transfers into their business account. No equity, no repayment terms, no documentation. I studied the numbers, seeing my generosity quantified in ways that made it impossible to ignore the magnitude of what I'd been doing. What happens if I stop? All of it? Caleb leaned back in his chair, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. Legally, nothing. You have no obligation to continue any of these payments. Practically, their household budget appears to depend on your contributions for about 60% of their monthly expenses. Rowan's business would likely fail within 2 to 3 months without your support. And if it fails, then it fails. Businesses fail every day, Damon. The ones that survive do so because they're viable, not because someone's father-in-law is subsidizing their operations indefinitely. We spent the next 2 hours going through every line item, every automatic payment, every recurring transfer. Caleb explained the legal implications of stopping each one, the practical consequences, and the timeline for making changes without creating unnecessary complications. By the end of the meeting, I had a clear picture of exactly what I was dealing with. More importantly, I had a plan. I want to stop all voluntary payments effective January 1st, I told him. But I want to do it cleanly, legally, and without creating problems for Mara. What about Christmas? The holiday expenses they're expecting you to cover? I thought about the fortune cookie message, still folded in my wallet. Christmas is their event now. They can handle their own expenses. From Caleb's office, I drove directly to see my attorney. Lena Brooke had handled my divorce years earlier, and she'd been managing my estate planning and other legal matters ever since. Like Caleb, she'd never been particularly impressed with my family's financial arrangements. I need to make sure I'm protected, I told her, explaining what I was planning. I want to stop supporting them, but I want to do it in a way that doesn't create legal problems for me later. Lena reviewed the documentation Caleb had provided, asking questions about verbal commitments I might have made, written agreements that might exist, any promises that could be construed as legally binding. The answer to all of her questions was no. I'd been remarkably casual about giving away large amounts of money, which was financially foolish but legally protective. You're in the clear, she said finally. Everything you've been paying is voluntary. You can stop any or all of it at any time, for any reason or no reason. They have no legal claim to your continued support. What if they try to make problems? Claim I promised things I didn't promise, or that I'm abandoning my responsibilities? Then we'll deal with it. But Damon, you need to understand something. You're not abandoning your responsibilities. You're declining to continue subsidizing 2 adults who should be capable of supporting themselves. There's a difference. She helped me draft a simple letter, nothing dramatic or accusatory, just a clear statement that my financial support would be ending on a specific date. The letter was polite, straightforward, and legally sound. It didn't explain my reasons or justify my decision. It simply stated the facts. When are you planning to send this? Lena asked. I'm not, I said. I'm going to let them figure it out on their own. She raised an eyebrow. You're not going to give them notice? They didn't give me notice about Christmas, I said. I learned about that from a fortune cookie. They can learn about this from their bank statements. My final stop was the bank. I'd been making most of the transfers online, but I wanted to speak to someone in person to make sure I understood exactly how to stop all payments cleanly and completely. The branch manager walked me through the process of canceling automatic transfers, stopping recurring payments, and closing the line of credit I'd established for Rowan's business emergencies. It was surprisingly simple. A few forms, a few signatures, and decades of financial support would end as quietly as they'd begun. Is there a specific date you want these changes to take effect? She asked. I thought about it for a moment. Christmas was 3 weeks away. They were probably already making plans, placing orders, assuming my money would cover everything as it always had. December 15th, I said. Make everything stop on December 15th. Driving home that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Control. Not the bitter satisfaction of revenge, but the calm confidence that comes from making decisions based on reality rather than wishful thinking. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply stopping behavior that wasn't working for anyone involved. They would learn to manage their own finances, or they wouldn't. Rowan's business would become viable, or it wouldn't. They would develop gratitude and respect for family relationships, or they would continue taking them for granted. But whatever happened, it would happen without my money enabling choices they weren't prepared to live with. The fortune cookie message was still in my wallet, but it felt different now, less like an insult and more like a gift. A moment of clarity that had allowed me to see the situation as it really was and make decisions based on truth rather than hope. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in years, I was looking forward to Christmas. The next 2 weeks passed with an almost surreal normalcy. My phone continued to buzz with messages from the family group chat, each one a small window into a world that was about to change dramatically but didn't know it yet. Venue confirmed for Christmas Eve. They're setting up the private dining room with the decorations we picked out. Going to be beautiful. This from Alara, accompanied by photos of an upscale restaurant I'd never heard of but was apparently paying for. Ordered Mara's bike today, the pink one with the streamers she wanted, plus the helmet and accessories. She's going to flip out. Rowan, spending money he didn't have on gifts, I wouldn't be there to watch her open. Catering menu finalized. They're doing the prime rib option we discussed, plus the appetizer selection and the special dessert course. Worth every penny for family time. Again from Alara, as if she had any idea what those pennies actually cost or where they were coming from. I read each message with the detached interest of someone watching a movie they'd seen before. I knew how this story ended, but the characters were still acting out their parts, unaware that the script was about to change. The most telling message came from Rowan on December 10th. Business is picking up. Gave the team their Christmas bonuses early this year. Sometimes you have to invest in people to keep good talent, you know? Christmas bonuses. Paid with money that was about to stop flowing in 5 days. I didn't respond to any of the messages. I'd been gradually reducing my participation in the group chat over the past few weeks, and no one seemed to notice. They were too busy planning and spending and assuming to pay attention to my growing silence, but other people were paying attention to things my family wasn't. On December 12th, I got a call from Caleb. I've been monitoring Rowan's business account like you asked, he said. They're cutting it very close. The account balance is under $2,000 and they have payroll due Friday. Plus they've got several vendor payments scheduled for next week. What happens if the money isn't there? Payroll bounces, vendor payments fail, and the business goes into crisis mode very quickly. Most small businesses can't survive bounced paychecks. Employees quit immediately, and word spreads fast. I thought about Rowan's confident message about Christmas bonuses and investing in people. How long before it becomes obvious that something's wrong? If your usual transfer doesn't hit their account by Friday, they'll know by Monday. The question is whether they'll figure out it's permanent or assume it's just a delay. That same afternoon, I received a text message from Alara. Dad, can you handle the final venue payment? They need it by Thursday to confirm everything for Christmas Eve. $200 total, thanks. Not a question, despite the question mark. Not a request, despite the can you. Just another assumption that I would, of course, handle whatever needed handling. I didn't respond to that message either. Thursday came and went. Friday arrived with a flurry of activity in the group chat as people shared excitement about the weekend, made final preparations for Christmas, and generally acted like people who had no idea their financial foundation was crumbling beneath them. Saturday morning brought the first crack in their confidence. A message from Rowan. Weird issue with the business account. Bank says there's insufficient funds, but that can't be right. Probably just a computer glitch. Should be sorted out by Monday. Sunday. Still having issues with the bank. Going to call them first thing tomorrow. Might be some kind of security hold or something. Monday brought reality. My phone rang at 8:47 a.m. Dad? Alara's voice was tight with something between confusion and panic. Did you send the venue payment? They're saying they haven't received it, and they need it today, or they're going to cancel our reservation. I let the phone ring 3 more times before answering. Not because I was avoiding the conversation, but because I wanted to be completely calm when I had it. Hello, Alara. Dad, did you get my message about the venue payment? They're saying, I got your message. A pause. Okay, so, are you going to send it? They need it today. No, I said simply. Another pause, longer this time. No? What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not sending the venue payment. I'm not paying for Christmas this year. But we already booked everything. We already invited people. You already made plans, assuming I would pay for them, I said, keeping my voice level and calm. That was your choice. Paying for them would be my choice. And I'm choosing not to. Dad, this isn't funny. We need that payment today or we lose the whole reservation. Then you should probably figure out how to make that payment. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, trying to process what I was saying. Are you mad about something? Is this about the fortune cookie thing? Because that was just... This isn't about anger, Alara. This is about reality. You told me I'm not welcome at Christmas, fine. But if I'm not welcome at Christmas, then Christmas isn't my responsibility. We didn't mean... Yes, you did. And that's okay. But you can't have it both ways. You can't exclude me from the family and include me in the expenses. I hung up before she could respond. The phone rang again immediately. I didn't answer. It rang 4 more times over the next hour, alternating between Alara's number and Rowan's. I didn't answer any of them. The group chat exploded with activity, messages flying back and forth between Alara and Rowan, trying to figure out what was happening, how to handle the venue situation, whether this was some kind of misunderstanding that could be cleared up with the right conversation. Maybe he's having some kind of health issue? From Alara. Or maybe he's finally lost his mind. From Rowan. Should we call his doctor? Or maybe that accountant of his? I'm going to drive over there and talk to him in person. This is insane. But nobody came to my house. Nobody showed up at my door demanding explanations or trying to work things out face to face. Because despite all their messages about family and relationships and working things out, they didn't actually want to deal with me as a person. They wanted to deal with my money, and when my money became unavailable, I became irrelevant. Tuesday brought news that Rowan's business was in free fall, paychecks had bounced, 2 employees had quit, and a major vendor was threatening legal action over unpaid invoices. The Christmas bonuses he'd paid early were being clawed back by the bank as insufficient funds fees piled up. Wednesday. Dad, please call me back. We need to talk about this. There has to be some kind of misunderstanding. Thursday. This is ridiculous. You can't just cut off your own family without any explanation. Call me back. Friday. Fine. If you want to be petty and vindictive, that's your choice. But you're hurting Mara too, and she doesn't deserve this. Saturday, December 21st. Silence. Christmas Eve was 3 days away, and for the first time in years, it was going to happen without my money, without my planning, and without my presence. I found myself curious about what kind of Christmas they would create when they had to create it themselves, pay for it themselves, and take responsibility for it themselves. But I wouldn't be there to see it. After all, I wasn't welcome at Christmas. The fortune cookie message was still in my wallet, but I didn't need to look at it anymore. I had it memorized. More importantly, I'd finally learned to take it at face value instead of pretending it meant something other than what it clearly said. They'd given me the gift of clarity. Now I was giving them the gift of consequences. Christmas Eve arrived gray and cold, with the kind of persistent drizzle that makes everything look tired and washed out. I spent the morning reading, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm in my cup, and ignoring the increasingly desperate messages that continued to appear on my phone with the regularity of a metronome counting down to something inevitable. The venue had canceled their reservation on Tuesday when the payment never materialized. The catering company had followed suit on Wednesday, citing their policy about deposits and final payments. By Thursday, their carefully planned Christmas celebration had collapsed entirely, leaving them scrambling to figure out how to salvage some kind of holiday gathering from the wreckage of their assumptions. Through the group chat messages, I could track their attempts to create an alternative plan like watching a ship slowly sink in real time. Someone's apartment was too small for the guest list they'd already committed to. Someone else's house wasn't available on Christmas Eve because they had their own family plans. The backup restaurant they found required a deposit they couldn't cover, and their credit cards were apparently maxed out from previous holiday shopping. The simplified menu they planned still cost more than they had available in their checking account. By Christmas Eve morning, the messages had stopped entirely. The silence in the group chat was more eloquent than any of the panicked planning messages had been. I was finishing a late lunch, leftover pasta I'd made myself, nothing fancy, when my doorbell rang with that insistent double chime that suggested someone had pressed it twice in quick succession. Through the window beside my front door, I could see Alara's car in my driveway, the silver sedan I'd helped her buy 2 years ago when her old car finally gave out. I could see her standing on my front porch with Mara beside her, both bundled up against the cold in coats that looked new. Not Rowan, just my daughter and granddaughter, and that absence spoke volumes about how this conversation was likely to go. I opened the door and found myself looking at two very different expressions. Mara's face lit up with the uncomplicated joy that 7-year-olds reserve for grandparents they genuinely love, her eyes bright despite the gray day behind her. Alara's face, by contrast, showed the strain of someone who'd spent the past 2 weeks watching her comfortable world fall apart piece by piece, like a puzzle someone had started taking apart without asking permission. "Grandpa Damon!" Mara rushed forward for a hug, her small arms wrapping around my waist with the fierce affection that children give so freely, and I found myself smiling genuinely for the first time in weeks. "Hello, sweetheart. You look very pretty today." And she did. Someone had made an effort despite everything falling apart around them. She was wearing a red velvet dress that I'd probably paid for at some point, with her hair done up in ribbons that matched perfectly. The outfit was carefully chosen, lovingly prepared, and it reminded me that whatever else was happening, someone was still trying to make Christmas Eve special for this little girl who didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of adult failures and consequences. "We came to bring you a present," Mara announced with the solemnity of a child delivering something very important, holding up a small wrapped package covered in snowflake paper. "I picked it out myself. Mom helped me wrap it, but I chose it all by myself." "That's very thoughtful of you, sweetheart." I accepted the gift with the respect it deserved and looked at Alara, who was studying my face like she was trying to read a foreign language she'd never learned to speak. Her eyes were searching for something, understanding, maybe, or mercy, or just some indication of what was about to happen. "Can we come in?" Alara asked, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. "We need to talk. Please, Dad." I stepped aside to let them enter, and Mara immediately began exploring my living room like she was seeing it for the first time, which I realized with a pang of something like guilt. She probably was. Despite all the money I'd spent on their family over the years, despite all the transfers and payments and bailouts, they'd rarely visited my house. I was expected to come to them, to fit into their schedule, to accommodate their preferences and their timing and their convenience. The living room felt different with them in it. Warmer, more lived in, but also uncomfortably intimate for the conversation we were about to have. My books lined the shelves, my photographs hung on the walls, my life on display for people who'd never bothered to learn much about it beyond how much money it could provide. "Mara, why don't you go look at the books in Grandpa's office?" Alara suggested, her voice taking on that overly bright tone parents use when they are trying to distract children from adult problems. "I need to talk to him for a minute. There's a whole shelf of picture books in there that used to be mine when I was your age." Mara nodded eagerly and scampered off toward my office, her footsteps light and happy, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break in the room she was leaving. Once Mara was out of earshot, once the office door had clicked shut and we could hear her exclaiming over something she'd found, Alara's carefully maintained composure cracked like ice under pressure. "Dad, what the hell is going on? Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any concept of the damage you've caused?" "I've stopped paying for things that aren't my responsibility," I said calmly, keeping my voice level and even. "What have you done?" The question seemed to catch her off guard, as if she'd expected me to apologize or explain or justify myself. "I've spent the past 2 weeks trying to salvage Christmas for my daughter while figuring out why my father has suddenly lost his mind. 2 weeks of panic and stress and scrambling to figure out what's happening and why." "I haven't lost my mind, Alara. I've found my boundaries. There's a difference." She stared at me like I was speaking a language she didn't recognize, her eyes wide with genuine incomprehension. "Boundaries? What are you talking about? We're family. Family doesn't have boundaries about helping each other." "Are we?" I asked, and the question hung in the air between us like smoke. "Because the message I received was that I'm not welcome at Christmas, so I'm trying to understand what kind of family excludes someone from Christmas but expects them to pay for it. Help me understand that logic." "That fortune cookie thing was just—" she started, but I cut her off. "Just what? Just a joke? Just a way to let me know how you really feel? Just a message you were too cowardly to deliver directly, so you used your daughter as a messenger?" Her face flushed red, and I could see her struggling between anger and something that might have been shame. "It wasn't supposed to be mean. It was supposed to be, I don't know, a way to let you know that we wanted to do Christmas on our own this year, without having to worry about what you wanted or what you expected, or whether you were enjoying yourself or judging how we did things. Without having to include me in the family celebration I was paying for," I said, and the words landed between us like stones dropping into still water. "It wasn't like that," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then what was it like, Alara? Explain it to me, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you wanted my money, but not my presence. You wanted me to fund your Christmas, but not attend it. You wanted the benefits of having a father without the inconvenience of actually dealing with one, without having to see me sitting at the table, without having to make conversation, without having to pretend you valued me as anything other than a bank account with occasional opinions. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her trying to find words that would make this conversation go the way she wanted it to go, that would somehow turn this around and put the blame back on me. Finally, she said, We thought it might be easier if we kept things simple this year, less complicated." "Simpler for who?" I asked. "For everyone," she said, but she couldn't meet my eyes. "You always seem so uncomfortable at family gatherings, like you don't really want to be there, like you're just going through the motions. And Rowan thought maybe you'd prefer to just contribute without having to sit through all the family stuff you don't seem to enjoy." There it was. The truth, delivered with the casual cruelty that comes from people who've convinced themselves that their selfishness is actually consideration for others, that their desire to exclude someone is really about protecting that person's feelings. "So, you decided I don't enjoy spending time with my family," I said slowly. "And the solution was to exclude me while keeping my financial support, to take my money but not my presence, to cash my checks but not include me in the celebration those checks were paying for." "We didn't exclude you. We just thought, you told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas, Alara." My voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it now. "Through a fortune cookie that my granddaughter delivered because none of you had the courage to say it to my face. How is that not exclusion? What would you call it?" She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, the kind people cry when reality isn't cooperating with their preferred version of events, when the world won't bend to accommodate their desires. "Dad, please. Rowan's business is falling apart. The accounts are frozen. The employees are quitting. We can't make the mortgage payment next month. The bank already sent us a warning notice. We had to cancel Christmas entirely because we couldn't afford to do anything. Mara doesn't understand why there's no Christmas party, why her friends can't come over, why everything is different this year. She keeps asking what she did wrong." "And whose fault is that?" I asked. "It's not about fault. It's about family. It's about helping each other when things get hard." "I've been helping for 3 years, Alara. 3 years of constant financial support. I've paid for your house, your cars, your vacations, your business expenses, your child's education, and every holiday celebration you've had. What have you done to help me? What have you contributed to my life besides expectations and demands?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge she couldn't meet, a test she'd never studied for. Because the answer was nothing. She'd done nothing to help me, nothing to support me, nothing to make my life easier or better or more pleasant. She'd taken my money and my support and my presence for granted while giving nothing in return except the occasional obligatory communication and the privilege of funding her lifestyle. "I'm your daughter," she said finally, as if that explained everything, as if those 3 words somehow justified 3 years of one-sided support. "Yes, you are, and I'm your father. But being family doesn't mean one person gives everything while the other person takes everything. That's not a relationship. That's exploitation. That's using someone. So what, you're just going to cut us off? Abandon your own family? Let us lose everything? I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm stopping enabling behavior that isn't good for any of us. You're 32 years old, Alara. You have a college degree, a husband with a college degree, and every advantage I could possibly give you. If you can't figure out how to support yourselves by now, continuing to subsidize you isn't helping. It's preventing you from growing up. It's keeping you dependent and entitled and unable to function as adults. And what about Mara? What about your granddaughter?" Her voice rose, reaching for the emotional weapon she thought might work. "She's going to suffer because of this, because you decided to punish us." It was the question I'd been dreading, the one designed to make me feel guilty for choices that were actually reasonable and necessary. "What about her?" "She's going to suffer because of this, because you decided to punish us for one stupid joke. She's innocent in all of this." "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm declining to continue paying for adults who should be able to support themselves. If Mara suffers, it's because her parents made choices they couldn't afford and expected someone else to cover the consequences. That's on you, not me." "She's 7 years old. She doesn't understand why Grandpa suddenly doesn't care about her anymore. She thinks she did something wrong." That one hit harder than I'd expected, struck somewhere deeper than the other accusations, and I had to take a breath before responding. "I care about Mara more than you apparently realize, which is why I'm not going to continue teaching her that money appears magically whenever it's needed, that adults don't have to be responsible for their choices, and that family relationships are based on financial transactions rather than love and respect. She deserves better than that. She deserves to see adults who take responsibility for their lives. From my office, I could hear Mara talking to herself as she looked through my books, her voice bright and happy and completely unaware of the conversation happening in the next room. The innocence in that voice made everything we were discussing feel even more stark and painful. "What do you want from us?" Alara asked, and for the first time her voice sounded genuinely defeated rather than just frustrated or angry. "What would it take to fix this?" "I want you to grow up," I said simply. "I want you to take responsibility for your own lives. I want you to stop seeing me as a wallet and start seeing me as a person. I want to be included in family celebrations, not just expected to fund them. I want gratitude instead of entitlement. I want respect instead of assumptions. I want to be valued for who I am, not what I can provide. And if we can't do that, then you'll figure out how to live without my money. Millions of families do it every day. You're not special or unique in needing to support yourselves." She was quiet for a long time, staring at the floor like the answers might be written there in patterns only she could see. Finally, she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between understanding and resentment, acceptance and rebellion. "The fortune cookie," she said quietly. "That wasn't Mara's idea. She doesn't even know what was really in yours." "I know." "Rowan thought it would be funny, a way to let you know that we wanted to do Christmas without you this year without having to have an awkward conversation about it. He said you'd probably be relieved. And you went along with it. I thought maybe it would be easier for everyone. You never seem to enjoy our parties anyway, and we thought maybe you'd be relieved not to have to sit through another family dinner where you look like you'd rather be anywhere else. Did it ever occur to you to ask me what I wanted instead of deciding for me? We thought we knew what you wanted." "You thought you knew what would be convenient for you," I corrected. "There's a difference." She nodded slowly, accepting the correction. "Yeah, maybe we did. Maybe we've been doing that for a long time." Mara appeared in the doorway then, holding one of my old photo albums, her face bright with discovery. "Grandpa, is this you when you were little? You look so different." I looked at the album she was holding, pictures from my own childhood, my parents, family gatherings from decades ago. "That's me with your great-grandparents, your grandmother's parents, who you never got to meet." "They look nice," she said, studying the photos with intense curiosity. "Did they give you presents for Christmas?" "Sometimes," I said, kneeling down to her level. "But the best present they ever gave me was teaching me that family means showing up for each other, being there, not just paying for things." Mara nodded solemnly. "Like how you always come to my school plays?" "Exactly like that, sweetheart." Alara was watching this interaction with something that might have been understanding starting to dawn on her face. "Dad," she said quietly, "what would it take? For things to go back to normal?" "They can't go back to normal," I said, standing up. Normal wasn't working for anyone, but they could go forward to something better. "Like what?" "Like a relationship based on mutual respect instead of financial dependency. Like family gatherings where everyone contributes instead of one person paying for everything. Like actually wanting me there instead of just wanting what I can provide." "And if we tried to do that?" I looked at Mara, still absorbed in the photo album, then back at Alara. "Then we'd see what happens. But it would have to be real, Alara. Not just words designed to get the money flowing again. Real changes in how you treat me, how you include me, how you think about family relationships." She nodded slowly. I think I understand. Finally. "Do you?" "You didn't cut us off because you're mean or vindictive. You cut us off because we were treating you terribly and expecting you to pay for the privilege." The understanding was accurate. That's a fair summary. And the fortune cookie was just the last straw. It was clarification. It helped me see the situation clearly instead of making excuses for behavior that wasn't acceptable. Mara looked up from the photo album. "Mommy, are you crying?" "A little bit, sweetie. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they realize they've made mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" Alara looked at me, then back at her daughter. "The kind where you hurt someone you love because you weren't paying attention to how your actions made them feel." "Are you going to say sorry?" "Yes, baby. I'm going to say sorry, and then I'm going to try to do better." Mara nodded approvingly. "That's what you're supposed to do when you make mistakes." From the mouths of babes. We talked for another 20 minutes while Mara explored my house. We talked about specific changes that would need to happen, concrete steps rather than vague promises. We talked about Rowan's business and whether it was worth saving. We talked about their budget, their need to learn to live within their means. When they finally left, Mara hugged me goodbye and made me promise to open the present she'd brought. Alara hugged me too, and for the first time in years, it felt genuine. "Dad," she said as they were walking to the car, "next Christmas, would you like to help us plan it? Not pay for it, but actually plan it with us?" "I'd like that very much," I said. After they drove away, I opened Mara's present. It was a small picture frame with a photo of the two of us from her last birthday. On the back, in her careful handwriting, she'd written, "For Grandpa, who always makes everything better." I put the frame on my desk, next to the folder labeled December that contained the fortune cookie message, 2 pieces of paper that told the whole story, where we'd been and where we might be going. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more conversation that needed to happen. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Rowan, we need to talk. Tonight. My office, 7 p.m. I looked at the message for a long moment, then typed a simple reply. "No, my house, 8 p.m. Come alone." If he wanted to have this conversation, we'd have it on my terms, in my space, where I held all the cards. At exactly 8 p.m., my doorbell rang. Rowan stood on my porch, and he looked like a man who'd been through a war and lost. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. The confident swagger he usually carried was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. He walked into my living room like a prisoner entering a courtroom. I gestured to the chair across from mine, not the comfortable couch where Alara had sat, but a straight-backed chair that offered no comfort. "You wanted to talk," I said. "Talk." Rowan opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "What the hell are you doing, Damon? Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" "I've stopped subsidizing your failing business and your lifestyle that you can't afford. What have you done?" His face flushed red. "You can't just cut us off like this. We had an arrangement." "No, we didn't. You had expectations. I had obligations I chose to fulfill. Now I've chosen to stop. There was never an arrangement, Rowan. There was never a contract. There was only your assumptions and my generosity, and one of those things has ended. My business is collapsing. My employees are quitting. Our mortgage is due in 2 weeks, and we can't pay it. Then I suggest you figure out how to handle those problems, like an adult, like a business owner, like someone who's responsible for their own choices." "You're destroying my life?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm simply declining to continue funding your life. There's a difference. Your business is failing because it's not viable, not because I stopped propping it up. Your mortgage is due because you bought a house you couldn't afford. Your vendors are angry because you made commitments you couldn't keep. None of that is my fault, Rowan. All of it is yours." He stared at me with something between hatred and disbelief. "This is because of that stupid fortune cookie, isn't it? Because of one joke that you're too sensitive to handle?" "No," I said, my voice dropping to something colder. "This is because you and my daughter decided I wasn't welcome at Christmas while still expecting me to pay for it. This is because you've spent 3 years treating me like a bank account instead of a family member. This is because you've taken everything and given nothing back except contempt and entitlement." "We never—" "You laughed," I interrupted. "You sat at that table and laughed at my exclusion from Christmas. You thought it was hilarious that I'd been told through a fortune cookie that I wasn't welcome at the celebration I was paying for. You found it funny that my granddaughter had been used to deliver a message that none of you had the courage to say to my face." Rowan's mouth opened and closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. "And then you went back to assuming my money would keep flowing. You paid Christmas bonuses you couldn't afford. You booked venues you couldn't pay for. You made plans that depended entirely on my continued support, while simultaneously making it clear that I wasn't welcome to participate." "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. You meant exactly what you said and exactly what you did. You wanted my money without my presence. And now you're discovering that when you treat someone like an ATM instead of a person, eventually they stop dispensing cash." Rowan stood up, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, I thought he might actually try something physical, and part of me almost wished he would. But he didn't. Instead, he just stood there, shaking with impotent rage and fear. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "What would it take to fix this?" "From you?" I stood up as well, meeting his eyes directly. "Nothing. There's nothing you can offer me, Rowan. No apology, no promise, no amount of groveling that would make me trust you again or want to support you again. You've shown me who you are, and I believe you." "So that's it? You're just going to let everything fall apart?" "I'm not letting anything fall apart. You built your life on a foundation you didn't own and couldn't maintain. I'm simply removing the temporary support structure I foolishly provided. What happens next is entirely up to you." "And Alara? Mara?" "Alara and I had a conversation this afternoon. A real conversation. She understands what needs to change, and she's willing to try. Whether that includes you is her decision, not mine." His face went pale. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that my daughter and my granddaughter are welcome in my life if they want to be there. But you, Rowan, you're not welcome. Not at Christmas, not at family gatherings, not in my house or my life. You made it clear that I wasn't welcome in yours, so now I'm returning the favor." "You can't do that." "I can, and I am. The same way you excluded me from Christmas. The same way you laughed at my exclusion. This is what consequences look like, Rowan. This is what happens when you treat people with contempt and assume there will never be a price to pay." I walked to my front door and opened it, the cold evening air rushing in. "This conversation is over. You can leave now." "Damon, please. Get out of my house." He stood there for another moment, his face cycling through emotions, anger, fear, desperation. But finally, he walked toward the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As he reached the threshold, I spoke one last time. "Rowan, that fortune cookie message? I still have it. Every time I look at it, I'll remember that you thought it was funny to exclude me from family while taking my money. You did this to yourself." He left without another word, and I closed the door behind him with a sense of finality. I walked back to my office and sat down at my desk, looking at the two items side by side, the fortune cookie message that had started everything, and Mara's picture frame that represented hope for something better. My phone buzzed with a message from Alara. "Rowan just got home. He's not taking this well. I think I need to make some decisions about my marriage. Thank you for today, Dad, for finally showing me what real love looks like." I typed a reply. "I'm here whenever you need me, for conversation, for support, for actual family time. But not for money, not anymore." Her response came quickly. "I understand. And Dad, I'm sorry for everything." "I know you are," I typed back. "Now show me through actions, not words. Show me by building a life you can actually afford. Show me by including me because you want me there, not because you need my money." "I will, I promise. Merry Christmas, Dad." "Merry Christmas, Alara." I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair, looking around my office at the life I'd built, the peace I'd finally claimed. The fortune cookie message had said I wasn't welcome at Christmas, and they'd laughed. They'd thought it was funny. They'd thought I would just accept it and keep paying anyway, but they'd made a critical miscalculation. They'd assumed that because I'd always said yes before, I always would. They'd assumed my generosity was weakness rather than choice. Now they knew better. Now they understood that every relationship has boundaries, even family relationships. Now they understood that respect isn't optional, and inclusion isn't negotiable, and taking someone for granted eventually means losing them entirely. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the fortune cookie message one last time, reading those 8 words that had changed everything. "You're not welcome at Christmas." They'd meant it as a dismissal, delivered with humor to soften the cruelty. But they'd accidentally given me permission to do what I should have done years ago, to stop enabling their dysfunction, to stop funding their entitlement, to stop accepting scraps while providing unlimited support. They told me I wasn't welcome at their Christmas, so I'd given them a Christmas without my money, without my support, without the safety net they'd taken for granted. And in doing so, I'd taught them a lesson that no amount of talking could have conveyed. Actions have consequences. Exclusion goes both ways. And money, no matter how freely given, is never actually free. I folded the fortune cookie message one final time and placed it back in the folder, then closed the drawer. The lesson had been learned, the message had been delivered, the consequences had landed exactly where they belonged. Outside my window, snow had started to fall. Christmas Eve was here, and I was spending it alone in my house, without family, without celebration, without the chaos and obligation that had defined the holiday for years. And I'd never been happier, because I'd finally learned what my family should have known all along, that peace is worth more than popularity, that boundaries are healthier than enabling, and that sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the opportunity to experience the natural consequences of their choices. They'd laughed when they told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas. Now they weren't laughing anymore.